Welcome to the Travel Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Vandenberg. On our show, I interview and connect with leaders in our industry, what has shaped them, the successes, failures, and everything in between. On today's show, I'm celebrating our first 10 episodes and reflecting on the leadership lessons from our first interviews. Before we start, I want to let you know about the Travel Leader community. Every month, I'll be gathering a group of travel leaders to continue the conversation about leadership. This is a group for travel leaders looking to share, reflect, and grow their leadership competencies with the support of myself as a trained coach. Learn more at www.thetravelleadercoach.com. And with that, well, hello everyone. Welcome to my first solo cast on the Travel Leader Podcast. Today, I'm reflecting on our first 10 episodes. That's what I understand in the podcast world is a bit of a milestone. So I'm really excited to reflect back on these first sessions with the wonderful leaders that I have interviewed over the last months. One of the things that really struck me in this process of creating this podcast and talking about leadership with so many great hospitality and travel leaders is some of the themes that have emerged through these conversations. And one of those themes came from a question that I asked is, when did you first feel like a leader? And what was really shocking to me, I don't know why, but I just had never thought about it before, was that a lot of leaders either felt they were a leader from the very beginning. They never knew a time when they weren't feeling like a leader, or they acknowledged it that it was the source of it was sometime in their youth. And so, for example, Evan Kaplan, he talked about how when he was on sports teams and people would sort of naturally follow him, that's when he realized that as a participant on a sports team, that he was a leader. And El Rustique, she talked about how she was in 6th grade and they were organizing a class trip and people were sort of looking to her for information and guidance on what was going to be happening with that trip. Another great one was with Ana Connolly. She talked about how she used to play with her friends and cousins and sort of direct everyone what to do. And that was kind of when she first felt like a leader. Another thing that emerged from that question was that validation is also really a clear theme in when people felt like they were really a leader. And what I mean by that is that someone like a mentor or a boss had said to them, hey, I want to give you an extra responsibility. And this came out in a conversation with Dr. Brian Williams. He talked about how at one point he was asked by his boss to train another team member, and he was only 15 at the time. So that was kind of a milestone moment because he realized someone was giving him the responsibility and he had to step up to the plate. Elaine Macy, kind of similar. She had an experience where a boss said, hey, I want you to go on this trip with me and represent our company. So it was being given that responsibility and that validation that she was capable of that. Another fascinating theme of leadership in these discussions has been how many leaders have been shaped by the adversity that they have faced in their life. And through this adversity, they didn't give up. And one example that I was really inspired by was Ana Connolly. She comes from Panama, and she is the first to graduate college from her family. And she came to the United States from Panama and went to university. And she not only had to kind of build her career and her education, but she was also learning English throughout all of this. And those steps were not easy steps, but she overcame them. And now she is a fantastic industry leader in hospitality. Another example that I really loved, I talked with Dr. Brian Williams about his early events that he created, and it took several times. And he had to, and facing failure on multiple occasions where these events were not really what you would call a success, especially in terms of finances and the ability to sustain them. But he didn't give up and he kept going. I was deeply touched by the story of Elaine Macy. And she recalled a time in her life when her husband left her and all she had was a can of soup. And that didn't stop her. And she said, I had to make it a choice not to let it affect me. Another great example in my conversations was with Michael Maxwell. He was just about to turn 50 years old, and this was just after the 2008 recession. He lost his job and really didn't know what he was going to do. He had to basically start back at the beginning. He got a job at a call center and ultimately formed a relationship with one of the people who called in for customer service. And that person ended up hiring him for a job at a restaurant. And the rest is history from there. So much great stories about people facing adversity. Another theme that came out was the theme of, I think, so much unexpectedly as well. We don't naturally think of leadership first as a role where you're demonstrating caring. And that, and also, especially as, you know, when we talk about the strengths of a leader, we may talk about things like the ability to formulate strategy and execute strategy. But what came back frequently in these conversations was the role of caring and how much and how important that was in being a leader. And for example, Sherry O'Reilly, she talked a lot about compassion and that every day she intentionally thinks about how she's going to show up at work and really kind of nurture her team members as their whole selves and not just in terms of their work and their performance. What also emerged was the deeper meaning of caring. It's not always just, you know, asking people how they are and patting them on the back, but caring also means that you're telling people the truth. And there was a great metaphor that Brian Williams gave, and he said, it's kind of like, don't let me have spinach in my teeth. So telling me I have spinach in my teeth is actually a form of caring. Similarly, Michael Maxwell, he said that caring is also actually holding people accountable. It's not just telling people what you think they want to hear. And I think that's a really powerful message, that candor and honesty and truth-telling is also caring. And Elle Rustique, I loved her answer. And, you know, she cares deeply, especially as a tech startup. She cares deeply about how her people feel about the work that they're doing. Because it can be hard to be a tech startup and not really know what the future will hold. And she's very conscious in the way she leads about that. The other really inspiring theme that came out from my conversations was about purpose, and that's really a key driver for many leaders. And this wasn't necessarily a surprise. I think that our industry, and I think many industries, are talking a lot about purpose and meaning. And Even though I didn't ask those questions directly, this was definitely a key theme that was talked about. And Elle Rustique, who started Tip Brightly, a tipping platform, she was driven to create this product because of the experience of her mother, who was a housekeeper. And she's really interested in making technology work for people who may not always have the linkage to platforms like this. And she's also very interested in changing the industry from a systemic level and having an influence on something bigger. That also reminds me of my discussion with Leah Murphy. We talked about how her creation of her hotel investment company is driven by the purpose of changing the face of what hotel ownership looks like and being a female owner in the industry. And also, in other ways, she's wanting to change the system and wanting to change the way that we relate to employees and work, how she works with her staff members. She wants to make that different than it has been in the past and influence others and model for others how it can be done better. And finally, I was blown away by one of the last questions I ask to my guests is, if you had everything you needed right now, what vision would you pursue for yourself? And when I designed that question, it was really meant to bring out what were someone's dreams and what were their personal dreams and goals for themselves, and creating that success for themselves, so much more inwardly driven. And what came out from a few conversations were guests who were thinking beyond themselves and were thinking about the change that they want to see in the world. For example, Dylan Beaumont, he talked about his relationship with a fellow hotel in the Ukraine and how he's been staying in contact with them throughout the war between the Ukraine and Russia, and how much he's really tried to support them through a very difficult time. And Sherry O'Reilly talked about her bigger vision of not having to wake up anymore in the morning to another news story about mass shootings at schools and how important that is for her, that's no longer happening. And beyond that, she has made it part of her mission to feed people. And she started out doing this, and this also kind of relates also to the purpose part. She started out going to food pantries and food shelves and just committing her time. And over time, that actually evolved to where her hotel, the Beauport in Gloucester, Massachusetts, has made meals for people. And finally, Elaine Macy, her vision is to work with disadvantaged women. And she talks a lot about this during our talk together, that she's always felt this, she's always felt driven to mentor young women and instill confidence and empower them. And her vision would be to continue doing this after her regular job and into retirement. So those are some of the themes and leadership lessons that I'm taking away from our first 10 episodes. And I'm so excited to really think about other questions I might ask these guests and other leadership insights we might pull out from these conversations. I hope you keep listening and supporting the Travel Leader podcast. This has been a great project, and I've learned so much from it. I hope you have as well. So keep on listening and share with friends. This has been the Travel Leader Podcast, and I look forward to seeing